So let's just operate under the assumption here that you're someone who's curious about Linux or interested and wants to try it. Um, so where do you start? Because there's a lot of different kinds of Linux out there, different flavors. They call them distros or distributions. My favorite is this one here on Linux Mint. If you can just go to linuxmint.com. There are, of course, many different versions of Linux out there. And all Linux is really just a different operating system than Windows. Operating systems, for those who don't know, who aren't familiar with that term, it's basically, just the underlying coding and instructions for your computer to do everything that it does. It's not at the hardware level, it's at the software level, but this is the best analogy I could think of at the top of my head, but if you can compare it to like a vehicle, it would be like the fuel that you put into the gas tank of your car. It's not the engine, it's not the tires, it's not, the hardware level stuff, but it's what allows those things to do what they do. Because a computer without an operating system, you're not going to get too far from that. It's not really going to do that much for you. It's how everything functions with the operating system. So Linux, all that is a different kind of operating system than Windows. It's just a different option for that. And so with Linux, what happened is there was a sort of a base, like this is the basis of it, and by its nature, it's an open platform. So basically, it's freely available for anyone to modify and use, to their liking. Anyone that has enough knowledge and capabilities can make their own version of Linux if they want. They can take what's there and modify it to their liking, and release their own flavor, as they call it, of Linux. So, but Mint is an interesting one. I've tried a variety of different Linux distributions over the years, and to me, I always just keep going back to Mint because it's so easy to use. It's simple, and everything just works with it. It's probably the easiest one to use for people that are used to Windows because it acts similarly and it looks similarly, and there's a lot of correlations you can easily draw between the two in the functionality and the form and everything. So that's the one I would recommend to people who have never used Linux before and they're coming from Windows and they want to just try it and they want it to be easy to use. Mint is definitely the way to go, I would think, in my opinion anyway. But you can look into it. There's many popular distributions out there for Linux. I mean, I could just start naming names, but it's all just going to come down to individual preference and everything. Ubuntu is the one that it is, and Debian, I guess, is the, I guess you could say the skeleton, the backbone of Linux Mint. That's what it's built off of. And so, there are versions of Linux that are even larger or, more fundamental, I guess, to the experience that Mint actually deviated from. It became its own from what was created from those versions. So it's called a fork is usually what the term is that's used. But so let's just look here. Right now we're in Linux Mint 20 lifecycle. It's towards the end of it. Linux Mint version 21 will be coming out here in the not so distant future. I think it's in development right now. But pretty much how that works is the Linux Mint versions last for about, I think the long-term release cycle is, I want to say it's 4 years. It might be 5. I can't quite recall off the top of my head. But pretty much if you've got one, it's good for, it'll say like it's good until, a certain date to where they will stop supporting it, and then it's usually 4 years, and then at that point you're encouraged to upgrade to a new version of Linux Mint, will also, it'll also be available for free, and all you'd have to do is just back up your data and then reinstall with the new version. So, but we'll get into that a little bit. I actually just want to read through what it has on the website here, because their website does a really good job, in my opinion, of giving you directions and explaining what it's all about with Linux. Like, they do it even better than I could, so I'm just going to probably read through it here for you really quick, just to kind of give you an overview. So it's like, what is Linux Mint? It's an operating system for desktop and laptop computers. It's designed to work out of the box and comes fully equipped with the apps most people need. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the to me, that's one of the big, huge pluses out of Linux Mint, is that it just works. It just works, and you don't have to struggle and fuss and fight with it. You don't updates are not a problem. They just work. With Windows, updates can be a nightmare sometimes. And that should be something simple. It should be something that most people don't even have to think about. That they just say, "Oh, okay, there's updates. Let me update it." Whatever software I have that needs updates or security features or whatever, and it's updated and it's done. And I think Linux Mint, for the most part, is able to do that more successfully than recent versions of Windows. I rarely have any, not even problems, but I rarely even have to interact with, the Linux Mint updater. It just handles itself and everything works, and you can just kind of forget about it and do something more important, more important to you than fussing with computer settings and stuff. So they have, a variety of software already built in, and it talks about them briefly here. Productivity software, graphic design, multimedia, gaming, any of that stuff. Gaming especially has come a huge way on Linux compared to even just a couple of years ago. And I'll probably go about nerd off on that direction in a future video, but any web-based stuff you can do. It's pretty much anything you can do on a Windows computer, you can do on a Linux computer. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Let's give it a try. And then here we've got some philosophies. So it says, why choose it? It's easy to use, it's fast, and it's comfortable. Yeah, so fast, that's one thing, too, is that it's another thing I forgot to mention earlier, but you'll often find, with Windows especially, as the longer you have hardware, the longer you have the operating system going, it starts to slow down. And a lot of things will say, oh yeah, well, computers get slower when they get older. Not necessarily. It's your operating system that's doing a lot of that bogging down, because what you'll see if you've used Linux Mint by comparison for a while is that slowdown doesn't really happen like it does on Windows. Your computer will run as well as it has, barring any actual failing hardware issues or anything like that. It just tends to run well and quickly, and startup times are fast. Shutdown times are fast, and it doesn't really degrade over time. So I think that's more of a Windows problem than a hardware problem, to be honest. But it is easy to use, and that's what's really great about Linux Mint, especially, is that it comes packaged with a lot of the stuff that you would, even in other Linux distributions, that you would have to go out and get separately. So you can really just get it started, and then most of what you need is already going to be there for you to just start using, and that's very convenient. And the interface, as I'm sure we'll check out in a future video, much easier than Windows, much more, much less cluttered, much simpler, much less cluttered. It reminds me more of how Windows 7 used to be, where, in my opinion, things were organized a lot better and presented a lot better than the more modern versions of Windows. But and then you can see here, it tells you about it. But one of the big things here at the bottom, free and open source. So the concept of open source software is basically that, to put it into a paraphrase or a nutshell or whatever you want to say, open source software doesn't cost anything to buy financially. Like, you can just use it, you can download it, and have it, and there you go. But more importantly than that, open source means that the underlying code, so the underlying instructions, computer instructions, the software, or the operating system in this case, it's all available. It's all visible. You can see it. Anyone can share it. They can modify it. They can review it. They can suggest things to add to it or improve it. So the whole world is able to put their eyes on open source software, the underlying mechanisms and how it's constructed and what it's doing. Everyone, it's all laid bare. It's all visible, transparent, laid there on the table. And there's a lot of advantages to that because, for one thing, if there is some kind of, let's say, security concern that happens, or maybe a bug is found or something, the whole world, potentially anybody in the whole world could, of course you have to have the know-how and the knowledge and all that, but it's available to anyone to look. They can say, oh, hey, look, I found this flaw, and let's go ahead and fix it by doing this, or those sorts of things. And so it's really powerful in that sense because anyone, anywhere can keep it up to date, can keep it, secure, can say, hey, I added this feature to it, or, anything like that. They can all contribute. And open source software by its nature is meant to be shared in that way. It's very open, very collaborative, very free, and it's, as a result of that, it's very secure because everyone can see, hey, if there was something shady going on behind the scenes, people could find it and say, hey, what the heck is this? Whereas with Windows, it is what's called closed source. Instead of open source, it's closed source software. So what that pretty much means is Microsoft, the company, is the only one that really knows what's going on under the hood, so to speak, with Windows. They're the only ones that really know everything about what's happening, and then that kind of goes back into like the camera and the microphone discussion from earlier. Like, they're really the only ones that know what the operating system is doing, what kind of data it's collecting, where it's sending it, you name it. And that also includes the security concerns too. And the problem there is that users are dependent on one company to make updates, and so everyone that uses Windows is at the mercy of Microsoft's schedule, their processes, their decisions. They do not have that level of freedom to say, hey, I don't like those changes that you made, so I'm going to, choose a different version of Windows. Well, no, you're not, because it's all Microsoft, and that's all you're playing by their rules just by buying into the Windows ecosystem. So that's one of the major advantages of Linux in general, because it's all open source, but and that includes Mint as well. And then it talks about the common questions here. So it's like, is it free? It's like, yes, Linux Mint is completely free of charge. Almost everything in Linux Mint is also open source. So that's pretty promising. Like, there's a certain aspects of it that are not open source, but generally the Linux community in general is very passionate, you'll find, about open source things, and advocates for it as much as possible. It says, will it work on my computer? Yes, it works on most computers. It can also be run from a live USB stick to make sure everything works fine without having to install anything. So I will mention the live USB and the live sessions here in just a little bit. And that's a really neat feature too, is that you can pretty much use Linux without really installing it on a computer if you just want to try it out and see what it's like. That's pretty cool, because that's not anything I don't think that Windows has ever been able to do, unless I'm mistaken. But it says, can I keep Windows? And it says, yes, you can have both Windows and Linux. A menu asks you which one to use when you start the computer. So this is what's called dual booting, or multi-booting. And it's basically where you have two operating systems running on a single computer, and you get to choose between them when you first start your computer. That's a really good way to start out with using Linux. If you're not quite ready to completely leave Windows behind, or if you're just curious and you just want to try it out for a while and see what you think, you can basically section off a portion of your hard drive space to put Linux on, and then Linux would have its own portion and your Windows machine would have the rest, and then in that way you can switch back and forth between them at any time that you need to. And there's some cases where that's quite helpful, because certain software would only work in Windows that say you needed a particular Windows application to use for your job or whatever. And maybe it doesn't work very well in Linux because there's certain apps that that's still the case even today. But I'll go into that in further detail later. But basically, that would be one situation where you may want to just dual boot both Windows and Linux, and then at the start you would choose which one you want to boot into. And it says, will it suit my needs? And then it says, hopefully. I mean, in most cases, that answer is probably going to be yes, because Linux does so much that there's it's a very short list of things that Windows exclusively is able to accomplish that Linux cannot. I mean, and it's probably just like the example I was explaining, where it's something that's made only to work on Windows. It's software that's Windows exclusive or something, and performs a singular function that you can't replicate without making new software or something. And it's in most cases it says Linux Mint comes with what most people need out of the box, as well as easy access to more than 60,000 software packages and it looks like almost 8,000 games there. And that really has come such a long way, just as someone who's been using Linux for about 10 years now, probably a little bit longer than that even. Just comparing, the Linux of 10 years ago from the one that's now, where we're at now with it, it's very impressive how far things have come to just be functional and, easy to use and just work on Linux. And here we have some press stuff, which I won't go into that too much, but some quotes about, basically reiterating the same things that we went through there. And they've got their blogs and all that. And here's some sponsors that are partners. And that just gives you a nice overview, though. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn even more, you can find my books at bookstoread.com/Jonathan. That's books, 2, read.com/JONATHAN.